A high-net-worth Korean CEO, defined by extreme operational efficiency and a zero-human domestic policy, finds his home life disrupted by the arrival of a vibrant African culinary specialist. After months of falling for her through her work alone, he remains paralyzed by his own professional pride. It is only when she introduces market competition through a calculated jealousy play that he is forced to execute a hostile takeover of his own heart. Kang Ji-hoon is the architect of Kang Global, a conglomerate that moves markets with the precision of a surgical strike. A Harvard MBA with a track record of ruthless asset optimization, he is a man whose time is valued at a rate most cannot comprehend. By the age of 32, he had already perfected the art of the hostile takeover, treating the global economy like a personal chessboard where he never loses a piece. Ji-hoon's home is not a residence. It is a controlled environment. He manages his domestic life with the same asymmetric information strategy he uses in the boardroom. His domestic staff is managed entirely through a proxy, his personal assistant. Ji-hoon has implemented a strict non-disclosure and non-encounter policy. He expects his wardrobe to be curated and his nutrition to be delivered with just-in-time manufacturing precision. He knows exactly where to find his silk ties and how to activate the warming tray for his dinner. Yet he has never made eye contact with the human capital responsible for these results. To him, a clean house and a cooked meal are simply successful deliverables. He carries his professional responsibilities like a heavy-duty liability insurance policy, always present, always protective, and incredibly expensive. He doesn't just work. He executes a vertical integration of his entire existence. He has no friends, only strategic partners. Every dinner is a negotiation. Every handshake is a contract. His only true witness is the rising line on his quarterly profit reports. Despite his high-yield performance, Ji-hoon possesses one significant unhedged risk: his secret habit. In the dark of the balcony, away from the eyes of the board, he is a chain smoker. He hides his lighters like they are off-balance sheet liabilities, terrified that the world might see a crack in his armor. He is a man who has mastered the art of being a CEO, but has completely failed to manage the impending merger of his own emotions. The vacancy for lead culinary asset was not posted on a standard job board. It was treated like a private equity offering. Kang Ji-hoon's PA, Mr. Han, released a redacted job description on a high-end, invitation-only executive portal. The requirements were severe zero-latency delivery, absolute discretion, and a total moratorium on human contact with the principal. Amara, a rising star in the culinary world, who had recently moved to Seoul to study the market fusion of spices, was advised to apply by her mentor. It pays like a merger and has the privacy of a Swiss bank, her mentor noted. Amara saw the restriction clause and laughed. To her, it looked like a barrier to entry she was more than happy to leap over. She was inspired by the challenge of cooking for a man who was essentially a ghost. She wanted to see if her food could force a revaluation of his cold life. The interview took place in a glass-walled boardroom at Kang Global HQ. It wasn't conducted by a chef, but by Mr. Han and two legal consultants. Amara wasn't intimidated. She treated it like a pitch deck presentation. The atmosphere was cold enough to preserve fish. Mr. Han stared at her through rimless glasses as if she were a wee, suspicious line item on a balance sheet. They didn't ask about her seasoning. They asked about her risk management protocols. How do you handle a scenario where the principal enters a room unexpectedly? Mr. Han leaned forward, his voice like dry parchment. Miss Amara, if you were to accidentally make eye contact with Chairman Kang, would you consider that a breach of contract or a personal failure? Amara didn't blink. I'd consider it a missed opportunity for him to thank the woman who just saved his palate from bankruptcy. When the notice of hire hit her inbox, Amara did a victory dance that would have violated every safety regulation in the building. She was hired with a salary that could fund a small startup. But then came the reality. She worked for 3 consecutive months in total isolation. She became a master of the ghost workflow, plating masterpieces and disappearing into the service elevator like a stealth asset before Ji-hoon's car even entered the basement. The fortunate day arrived during a downward trend in Ji-hoon's schedule. A power outage at the stock exchange sent him home 3 hours ahead of the forecasted arrival time. Amara was in the kitchen mid-song, seasoning a pot of spicy egg yuki soup that was intended to be his dinner deliverable. She was wearing her bright yellow head, loud, beautiful deviation from the monochrome corporate aesthetic of the house. Ji-hoon rounded the corner expecting a silent, empty kitchen. Instead, he slammed into a wall of heat, music, and the most intoxicating scent he had ever encountered. Ji-hoon froze. His briefcase nearly slipped from his hand, a catastrophic loss of physical capital. He was speechless, his brain attempting to process a human variable that wasn't in the morning briefing. He looked at her and felt his internal circuits overheat. He was terrified, captivated, and utterly liquidity trapped. She didn't scream. She slowly turned, tasting spoon still in hand. She took in the sight of the Ice King in the flesh. He was handsome in a way that felt like a hostile takeover of her senses. You're a person, Ji-hoon stammered, his business vocabulary failing him entirely. And you're the principal, Amara replied, recovering her composure with a cheeky grin. I must say, your physical valuation is much higher in person than on the company website. Are you here for a quality control check, or are you just hungry? Ji-hoon couldn't move. He stood there, a billionaire CEO, paralyzed by a woman holding a wooden spoon. It wasn't terrifying, it was a total market disruption. The invisible wall hadn't just cracked. It had undergone a complete structural failure. Culinary intelligence. Amara's secret wasn't just a spice blend. It was strategic data analysis. While Ji-hoon thought he was living in a vacuum, Amara was conducting a daily audit of his leftovers. She noticed his safe, bland food was barely touched on days the stock market dipped, suggesting he was eating out of obligation, not enjoyment. Her magic lay in sensory repositioning. She began to subtly infuse his environment. She didn't just cook. She engineered comfort assets that targeted his high stress levels. The day she decided to serve her signature jollof rice, she knew she was taking a massive calculated risk. Jollof is loud, bold, and unapologetic, the exact opposite of Ji-hoon's monochrome life. When Ji-hoon lifted the silver close that evening, he didn't find the usual pale steamed fish. Instead, he was met with a vibrant, smoky orange-red masterpiece that smelled of charred tomatoes, Scotch bonnet peppers, and an exotic warmth he couldn't name. His face went through a drastic market correction. He froze, his fork hovering like a suspended trade. As the first spoonful hit his palate, his eyes widened. It was a hostile takeover of his senses. The heat was a bold move, the smokiness was a premium layer, and the spices were a complex portfolio. He hadn't authorized, but couldn't stop consuming. For the first time in years, Ji-hoon didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a human. The food didn't just fill his stomach. It provided a compounded return of warmth that melted his icy professional exterior. Ji-hoon was overwhelmingly happy, but his corporate conditioning made him terrified of showing it directly. He was confused by the sudden liquidity of his emotions. To manage this, he began leaving performance reviews on the kitchen island small, sticky note compliments disguised as executive memos. The bold color palette of tonight's dinner showed excellent initiative. Maintain this trajectory. He was obsessed. He began arriving home earlier, his heart racing at a bull market pace just to see what disruption she had plated for him. The jollof rice changed his entire operational mindset. He became less irritable during board meetings because he was daydreaming about the next culinary merger. His attitude shifted from "I live alone because I choose to" "I live alone, but someone is finally looking out for me." He was no longer just a principal in a house. He was a man waiting for the one invisible asset that made his life feel like a successful venture. Due to a market volatility event that closed the exchange early, Ji-hoon arrived at his residence at 4:13 p.m., a massive deviation from the standard operating procedure. As he stepped into the foyer, his senses were immediately hit by a hostile aroma takeover. It wasn't the sterile scent of lemon wax he was used to. It was the smell of caramelized onions, slow-simmered tomatoes, and a spice so bold it felt like an unauthorized entry into his lungs. His heart began to beat at a high-frequency trading pace. His expectation was to find a silent, empty kitchen with a covered plate. Instead, he heard the chaos of productivity. Inside the kitchen, Amara was in the middle of a culinary sprint. Afrobeat music was blasting. Steam was billowing like a factory smokestack, and she was dancing between the stove and the island with a whisk in one hand and a spice jar in the other. Amara was a premium asset in every sense. Standing at 5'8", her skin was the color of deep espresso, glowing under the kitchen lights. She wore a vibrant, sunshine yellow head wrap that stood out against the corporate gray of his kitchen like a neon buy signal. Back home in Lagos, she had been a top-tier caterer for Hinnetworth weddings, known for her spicy diplomacy. She wasn't just a cook. She was a force of nature who had moved to Seoul to disrupt the local market. The eye contact, the technical glitch. When the door creaked, Amara spun around, her wooden spoon dripping with sauce. Ji-hoon's face underwent a total structural failure. He didn't just look at her, he processed her. His jaw dropped in a way that would have devalued his company's stock by 40% if caught on camera. He went from Ice King to Frozen System in 0.2 seconds. He felt a surge of irrational exuberance. She was more beautiful than any personnel file could describe. She wasn't terrified. Amara didn't do fear. She squinted at him, wiped a smudge of flour off her nose, and planted a hand on her hip. Well, look who decided to show up for the early bird special, Amara chirped, her voice cutting through his silence like a sharp interest rate hike. Ji-hoon stammered, his hand twitching at his side. You are the provider of the Jollof? I'm the CEO of this kitchen, and you're trespassing during production hours, she replied with a cheeky wink. She didn't bow. She didn't run. She walked right up to him, mentoring his personal space bubble, and held out the dripping spoon. Since you've already breached the contract by seeing my face, you might as well perform a quality audit. Open up, boss. Ji-hoon was paralyzed. His brain said exit strategy, but his heart said long-term investment. He stood there, a billionaire paralyzed by a woman in a yellow head wrap, realizing his zero human policy was officially a bankrupt ideology. The atmosphere in the kitchen was no longer the sterile, low-volatility zone Ji-hoon was accustomed to. It had transformed into a high-yield, high-heat production floor. The air was thick with the scent of thyme habanero and the soulful rhythm of a West African high-life track pulsing from Amara's phone. The sleek, marble countertops were covered in what Ji-hoon could only describe as unauthorized inventory, bowls of colorful peppers, open spice tints, and a rogue pile of plantain peels. Ji-hoon looked like a computer that had just been hit with the blue screen of death. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated, as if trying to calculate the risk-to-reward ratio of a spoon being shoved toward his face. His face was flushed not from the kitchen heat, but from a sudden, unhedged emotional exposure. She was the picture of market confidence. She leaned in, her eyes dancing with a mix of mischief and professional pride. Her grin was wider than a successful IPO opening, and she held that spoon like it was a scepter. The quality audit incident. Don't just stand there like a statue with a bad credit rating, Amara laughed, her voice rich and melodic. Your mouth is for eating, not for catching flies during business hours. Ji-hoon tried to maintain his executive poise. I have a strict policy regarding unvetted consumption, he managed to choke out. Oh, please, Amara scoffed, waving the spoon dismissively. You've been vetted by Mizola for months. You're already a majority shareholder in my spice blend. Now, open the vault. Amara didn't wait for a formal board resolution. She stepped forward, effectively closing the gap in their personal space bubble, and skillfully landed the spoon in his mouth. The moment the sauce hit his tongue, Ji-hoon's brain underwent a complete data wipe. The flavor was an explosion, a disruptive technology that bypassed all his defensive firewalls. It was spicy, sweet, and smoky all at once. He let out a sound that was half gasp, half moan, a sound that would have caused a scandalous drop in stock prices if heard in the boardroom. He looked at Amara, and for the first time, he didn't see an employee. He saw a woman who was the most vibrant asset he had ever encountered. Well? Amara asked, crossing her arms over her yellow apron. Is the return on investment high enough for you, or do I need to file for culinary bankruptcy? Ji-hoon swallowed hard, his face a shade of red that matched the sauce. The flavor profile is highly competitive, he stammered, trying to regain his professional footing. Highly competitive? Amara doubled over with laughter. You talk like a man who sleeps with a financial statement instead of a pillow. Just say, it's delicious, boss. It won't hurt your valuation, I promise. Ji-hoon felt a strange sensation in his chest, a flutter that wasn't a heart murmur, but a genuine human connection. He was terrified by how much he liked her laugh. It was a sound asset he wanted to invest in indefinitely. He looked at her, then at the mess, then back at her, and realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't want to exit the trade. He wanted to stay in the kitchen and see what else this disruptive force had in store. Ji-hoon, reeling from the sensory overload of the kitchen encounter, retreated to his balcony. His brain was spinning like a server under a cyber attack. He needed to stabilize his emotional market, and his default coping mechanism was a cigarette. He pulled out his luxury lighter, a sleek, gold-plated piece of capital equipment, and a cigarette, his hand trembling slightly. Just as he flicked the flame, a whirlwind in a yellow head wrap swept onto the balcony. The hostile seizure. Amara didn't just walk. She marched with the authority of a majority shareholder at a board meeting. Before Ji-hoon could even take a puff, she lunged forward with a movement so fluid it was practically a high-frequency trade. With a playful yoink, she snatched the cigarette right out of his lips and grabbed the gold lighter from his hand. She did a little victory twirl, tucking the lighter deep into her apron pocket and snapping the cigarette in half with the drama of a contract termination. She leaned against the railing, her face glowing in the twilight, wearing a grin that said she had just successfully pulled off a merger and acquisition of his soul. "Hey, that is private property," Ji-hoon stammered, his voice cracking like a failing startup. "This?" Amara held up the broken cigarette like it was a worthless junk bond. "This is a toxic asset, boss. Your lungs are a high-value infrastructure, and I won't have you polluting the air quality index of my kitchen's workspace. Consider this a mandatory health and safety intervention." The CEO's internal market crash. Ji-hoon was absolutely terrified. But he wasn't terrified of Amara. He was terrified of the unregulated feelings she was triggering. He felt liquidated. For years, his secrets, his loneliness, his smoking, his boredom were hidden behind his corporate firewall. Now, this woman had bypassed his security in 5 minutes. He was terrified because he realized he had no exit strategy. He couldn't fire her. The thought of going back to bland food felt like a recession. He couldn't ignore her. She was too loud for his quiet life. His mind was a chaotic spreadsheet of what-ifs. What if she sees I'm lonely? What if she realizes I've been reading her notes like they're love letters? He felt transparent, his sovereign status completely devalued. "Give that back," Ji-hoon commanded, trying to summon his executive authority. But he sounded more like a boy whose lunch money had been stolen. Amara let out a laugh that echoed off the glass towers of Seoul. "Or what? You'll file a litigation? Call your PA to negotiate a return of lighter agreement?" She stepped closer, poking his chest with a flour-dusted finger. "You need a better hobby, Mr. Billionaire. Try smiling. It has a much higher ROI and it's tax-free." Ji-hoon wasn't angry. He was enchanted. He stood there, watching her walk back into the kitchen, humming a song and patting the pocket where his lighter now lived. He felt a strange mix of happiness and panic. He had lost his cigarette, but for the first time in his career, he felt like he was finally invested in something real. He was no longer the man in control. He was a man who had just been taken over, and secretly, He didn't want to fight the acquisition. At this stage, Kang Ji-hoon was suffering from a complete internal market collapse. He was no longer just interested. He was experiencing a total emotional merger. Every time he heard Amara's laughter, his heart rate hit a record high. However, his executive pride was a massive barrier to entry. He was terrified that if he confessed, he would lose his leverage. He spent his days in the office staring at spreadsheets but seeing only the shape of a yellow head wrap. Ji-hoon noticed Amara rubbing her back while reaching for a high shelf. The next day, he had his PA install a state-of-the-art, custom-engineered motorized shelving system and a professional-grade anti-fatigue mat. When Amara asked why the kitchen looked like a NASA lab, Ji-hoon stared at his tablet and said the house is undergoing a structural optimization for insurance purposes. Please ignore the upgrades. He was actually hiding a smile behind his device, his heart pounding like a volatile stock. Ji-hoon began accidentally buying rare, expensive African spices and snacks during his business trips. He would leave them on the counter with a cold note. These were gifted by a client. They are cluttering my office. Dispose of them by incorporating them into the dinner deliverables. In reality, he had spent 3 hours in a specialized market in a hidden trade, researching exactly which brand she missed from home. During a sudden soul downpour, Ji-hoon saw Amara about to leave for the bus. He ordered his private chauffeur to drive her home in the Rolls-Royce. When she thanked him, he looked out the window and snapped. The car needed a mileage checkup in your neighborhood. It was a logistical coincidence. Don't let it affect your productivity. He then spent the evening pacing his floor, worried if she got inside safely. Amara wasn't fooled. She noticed that every time she entered a room, his valuation of her seemed to spike, his ears turned red, and his business voice became shaky. She knew he was in love, but he was too illiquid to admit it. She sought advice from her only confidant in the building, Mr. Park, the head of building security. Mr. Park was a tall, charming man who often shared market intel with Amara over morning coffee. He told her, bosses like him don't move unless there's a threat of a hostile takeover. You need to introduce a competitor to see how much he's willing to bid for your heart. Amara didn't need to look far for the acting role. She chose Mr. Park himself. He was perfect, handsome, uniformed, and already friendly with her. Amara didn't tell Mr. Park it was a play. She simply invited him into the kitchen more often during the CEO arrival window. She knew if Mr. Park acted naturally and friendly, Ji-hoon's jealousy algorithms would do the rest. Mr. Park was like a strategic brother to Amara. He admired her cooking and her spirit, and while he didn't know he was being used as a jealousy hedge, he was more than happy to linger in the kitchen and make her laugh while the Ice King watched from the shadows. Amara played her part quietly. She started talking about how helpful and strong Mr. Park was within earshot of Ji-hoon's study. She was waiting for the market to react, and she knew a crash was coming. The tension reached a critical peak on a Thursday afternoon when Ji-hoon arrived home to find his kitchen occupied by a third-party consultant. Mr. Park, the security head, was leaning against the marble island, laughing heartily as Amara fed him a piece of fried plantain. The atmosphere was one of high-yield joy, a direct contrast to Ji-hoon's usual low-volatility silence. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, his briefcase gripped so tightly his knuckles turned a corporate white. inside, his heart was undergoing a massive sell-off. He felt a heat rising from his collar that had nothing to do with the stove. It was a red line alert. His jaw was locked, and he felt an irrational urge to check Mr. Park's employment contract for a kitchen trespassing clause. He didn't storm in. Instead, he walked with a measured, executive stride, placing his briefcase on the table with a loud, metallic thud, a clear signal of presence. He adjusted his tie, his eyes darting between Amara's smile and Mr. Park's relaxed posture. He was terrified that a single outburst would reveal his unhedged emotional exposure, so he chose every word as if he were testifying before a regulatory board. "Mr. Park," Ji-hoon began, his voice dropping into a chilling, professional bass. "I wasn't aware that our building's security protocols required a physical presence in my private culinary sector during peak production hours." He was trying so hard to sound like a man concerned with operational security, but the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for a glass of water gave away his internal market crash. He refused to look at Amara, fearing that if he made eye contact, his defensive firewall would vanish instantly. Amara was absolutely thriving on the disruption. She saw the way Ji-hoon's chest puffed out and how he kept adjusting his cufflinks, classic signs of a man trying to maintain a high valuation while feeling completely devalued. She loved seeing the Ice King struggle to maintain his composure. To twist the knife, she leaned closer to Mr. Park and whispered, "Isn't he serious today? I think he needs more spice in his life." "Oh, boss," she chirped, turning to Ji-hoon with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Mr. Park was just performing a manual labor audit. These crates were heavy. It's nice to have a man around who doesn't communicate solely through sticky notes." Ji-hoon's expression flickered. For a second, the CEO mask slipped, revealing a man who was hurt, angry, and deeply envious. He looked at the plantain in Mr. Park's hand as if it were a stolen asset. "The crates are a logistical matter for the PA," Ji-hoon snapped, his voice tight. "Mr. Park, I believe there is a security breach on the 40th floor that requires your immediate, undivided attention. Now." As Mr. Park scurried out, Ji-hoon turned his back to Amara, staring out the window. He was breathing heavily, his mind a chaotic mess of jealousy and longing. He had successfully cleared the competition, but he realized his monopoly on her attention was under serious threat. Amara just stood there, biting her lip to keep from laughing out loud, knowing she had finally pushed the billionaire to his break-even point. The security breach had left Ji-hoon's internal market in a state of absolute chaos. As soon as the door clicked shut behind Mr. Park, the billionaire's professional mask underwent a complete structural collapse. He didn't just walk. He paced the kitchen floor like a predator whose territory had been violated. In a sudden, unhedged outburst of emotion, he grabbed a whisk from the counter, the very tool Amara used to create his daily joy, and hurled it into the sink with a metallic clang that echoed like a market crash. He then turned toward the ceiling, his hands clenched, letting out a frustrated groan of accumulated liability. The Ice King was melting in a furnace of his own making. He spun around, his eyes locking onto Amara's with a volatility she had never seen. He began to close the distance gap, his movements no longer calculated but driven by raw demand. He moved with a heavy, purposeful stride, backing Amara against the marble island. He didn't stop until he was in her immediate personal space, his shadow towering over her yellow head wrap. His tie was loosened, a rare breach of uniform. His chest was heaving, and his hands, usually steady enough for a surgeon, were visibly trembling as he reached out, not to touch her yet, but to grip the edge of the counter on either side of her, effectively locking the trade. "Do you have any idea?" Ji-hoon growled, his voice a low, dangerous frequency. "The level of internal disruption you have caused in this house? In my life?" He leaned in closer, his forehead almost touching hers. The scent of her spices and the heat of his anger merged into a high-pressure front. "I've spent my entire career avoiding unnecessary risks. And then you walk in here with your music and your colors and your jollof, and you make me feel like a bankrupt amateur." His voice broke, dropping to a whisper. "I didn't want to cook, Amara. I wanted a ghost. But I found a woman I've been falling in love with through every note, every spice, and every smile I wasn't supposed to see. I can't compete with a security guard. I don't do bidding wars. I want a total acquisition of your heart." Amara didn't flinch. She looked up at the billionaire, her heart performing its own high-frequency trade. Her eyes were soft, shimmering with a mix of triumph and deep affection. She wasn't just happy, she was emotionally liquid. She slowly raised her hand, her flour-dusted fingers grazing his jawline, a gentle merger that silenced his frantic breathing. Finally, she whispered, a cheeky but loving smile tugging at her lips. "I thought I was going to have to hire the entire police force to get a statement of intent out of you." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the rapid-fire rhythm of his heart, a beat that no longer belonged to Kang Global, but to her. "Via been in love with the man behind the post-it notes since the first week, Ji-hoon. I wasn't looking for a principal, I was looking for you." The atmosphere shifted from hostile to harmonious. The anger vanished, replaced by a compounded return of mutual longing. In that kitchen, surrounded by the mess of production, the billionaire CEO and the African cook officially signed the most important partnership agreement of their lives. No more secrets, no more market tests, just two souls who had finally found their true valuation in each other. The atmosphere in the kitchen reached a peak valuation of pure emotion. As Amara's hand lingered on his jaw, Ji-hoon didn't wait for a formal closing date. He leaned down, bridging the final gap in their personal space, and initiated a kiss that was a total acquisition of his senses. It wasn't a calculated move, it was a desperate, romantic hunger. The kiss was slow and deep, tasting of the spicy sauce Amara had fed him and the long, lonely months of invisible yearning. For Ji-hoon, it was a structural realignment, the first time his heart felt like it wasn't just a liability, but his greatest asset. Amara melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, confirming that their joint venture was now officially permanent. As they pulled apart, breathless and eyes locked, Amara reached into her apron pocket. With a soft, knowing smile, she pulled out his gold-plated lighter and a fresh cigarette she had confiscated earlier. She held them out to him, a silent question in her eyes. Ji-hoon looked at the items, his old coping mechanism, and then back at the vibrant woman in front of him. He gently pushed her hand away, closing her fingers over the lighter. I used to take these to the balcony because I was in a deficit of hope, he whispered, his voice thick with a raw, emotional sincerity. I was lonely, and the smoke was the only thing that filled the void. But now that I've found you, the market has changed. I don't need a temporary fix anymore. I have a reason to stay healthy, to stay strong, and to protect the long-term investment of our future. Dispose of it. I'm retiring that habit for good. Ji-hoon then reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and protective, a binding contract of his devotion. He didn't take her to the boardroom or the dining table. Instead, he led her toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows of his living room, which overlooked the glowing skyline of Seoul. He was taking her to his observation deck, the place where he usually stood alone to watch the world he had conquered. He felt a compounded return of peace. Taking her hand wasn't just a gesture. It was a public declaration to himself that his zero-human policy was dead. He felt a serious, grounding weight of responsibility. He was no longer just managing a company. He was cherishing a life. The Korean billionaire and the African cook. The contrast between his dark suit and her sunshine yellow head wrap was the most beautiful diversification his life had ever seen. From now on, Ji-hoon said, looking out at the city lights but seeing only her reflection, there are no more principals and employees in this house. We are equal partners. And I think it's time we updated the brand identity of this home. It's no longer a sanctuary of silence. It's a headquarters for us. Amara leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart full. The invisible protocol had ended, replaced by a love that provided the only return on investment that truly mattered, a lifetime of happiness.